welcome Reanimated fans to this week's episode of Reanimated. I am here, H.A. Conrad, as always with my intrepid co-host Stuart Tiffin. Hello, Stuart.
It's coffee time. It's coffee time in a big way.
It is coffee time. I'm still kind of waking up, and I've been up probably longer than you. We are here this week to chat with you all about the next couple of episodes of The Walking Dead Season 8 as we slog through. But ahead of that, we have a couple of news items a little bit late on the news this week because it is the holiday season. The biggest part of holiday zombie news is, and has been, and I think will be for the month of December, and in the Apocalypse, which young Stuart Tiffin is just not able to go and see because it's a little too far out there. But eventually
it's still across county lines. I mean, what was the last time you crossed county lines to see a movie?
I mean, I'd probably do it for this one just because it's fun. I'd make a day of it. I'd go into San Francisco to Yang Sing, have some soup dumplings, watch a Man on the Apocalypse. But I also don't have the children's, so a little different for me.
Yes. Well, it's just in San Rafael. I could always just go there, get some tandoori.
That is
call
very
it
good.
A day. But yeah, either way, it's still not happening. 40 miles, that's a bridge too far.
Tandoori sounds very good right now, at least here.
Right?
It's that's such comfort weekend food.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, eventually you'll see it, and eventually we'll review it, but not today. In other news, we covered this. I think we talked about this a while ago, but there was a gentleman. Was this in Mississippi or Tennessee?
Gulfport is Mississippi, right?
Okay.
There's probably more than one Gulfport.
Yeah.
Same with all these local news websites.
Let's say Mississippi. But anyway, this man thought zombies were chasing him, got into sort of a high-speed chase, and eventually was caught by the police. But they have since, the law has come down upon him. They did not take his excuse that zombies were chasing him. And they did sentence him to some time. So
15 years. That's not just some. That's
a significant amount of time. Well, I mean, I don't think the 15 years had anything to do with zombies. It had to do with the people he hurt on the way there and endangered.
Yeah, it wasn't just like he had a car that he was ramming other cars with. He stole a front-end loader.
Yeah.
Which I don't know does that mean a forkllift? I think that means a forklift.
It is a forklift. Yes.
I don't know why they would call it a front-end loader.
This is a pretty dramatic chase, I suppose.
Yeah, and then he rammed into a palm tree and broke his vehicle before he was apprehended. But yeah, he put people's lives in serious risk, which is, I'm sure, what went into the malicious mischief was also part of the sentencing, which makes me wonder if this judge, I don't know, the guy's clearly on like some kind of mind-altering drug, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's malicious mischief.
But that's the other thing, though. If you let somebody off the hook for something like this, I get why they came down on him so hard. But it does seem, given what happened, a little bit like of a stiff penalty. But maybe they're just trying to make an example of him. That zombies chasing you are not an excuse.
You cannot escape the law or zombies. So yeah, just don't do it, people. Don't take that PCP and steal that front-end loader / forklift and drive into people / trees.
Yep. In other news, you found this funny little interview with Michael Kudlitz.
Yeah, so he was at a Walker Stalker Con in Atlanta, which I assume was recently because this story just broke this weekend. And apparently told a crowd of shocked people that Rick Grimes' plan to attack Negan at the Sanctuary, which we just covered that episode last time on Reanimated, was a shitty plan. And he's like, let's be real clear. If he was going to kill anyone other than me, I had a choice, it would be Rick, because how many people was that a-hole going to get killed?
Right.
He's specifically referring to the scene, which we talked about, where they drive up to the sanctuary, invite all of the leadership of the
sanctuary out,
outside,
and then do nothing.
And then shoot at the windows above their heads. Yeah, absurd. So I'm glad that somebody else pointed it out, although I guess it might mean that Michael Cudlitz is not having any more recurring dream sequences on the show if he's going to start saying saying that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's not shocking. I mean, it's kind of an obvious thing that this storyline was not well thought out, or at least I don't think it was.
Also, he just did his directorial debut on the show, so I assume that or maybe they'll be cool with it.
Maybe.
You know, he might be able to still come back and do some more directing. He did Stradivarius, which I don't recall. I think that was on Fear the Walking Dead.
Yep.
Yeah, that was no. That was this season of The Walking Dead. Stradivarius, the one about the Stradivarius, which you probably haven't seen, but I'll check back in with you, like I said, in January.
Ha ha ha.
So,
Nice.
other news: David Leslie Johnson hyphen McGoldrick is one of the writers of the second episode, or the writer of Some Guy, which we're gonna review today, and he is in the news right now because he co-wrote the script for Aquaman.
Have you seen the trailer for this? Because it looks terrible to me.
I mean, it looks like a DC movie.
Oh no, it looks worse than that. I mean,
Even worse.
I also have this theory that Entourage kind of ruined this storyline for everybody forever.
I mean, I can't think of it without picturing.
You can't,
Vinny.
right?
No.
It's just not possible. So I kind of think that anything with this is kind of tainted. Though I did definitely enjoy did you see SNL last week?
No, but I've seen that Jason Momoa was pretty funny in a lot of sketches.
I just saw a few of the ones where he was like the holiday Santa stripper, and gotta say, he does have a good sense of humor about himself, so maybe that will help with this particular film. But the thing that I dislike just in general about the trailer, and I don't think it would be impossible to do this film without it, but the enormous amount of CG in this CGI is just it was almost hard to watch the trailer, so I don't know what the film itself is going to look like. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's amazing. The shark saber riding look a little rough. I don't know. It's a tough thing.
We'll see.
Are you
I
gonna go
look
see
forward
it?
to the scenes with Manta, I think is the name of the bad guy.
Yeah,
With
that's
the laser
fine.
eyes. I would see it. I don't know if I'll see it in the theaters. There's other stuff. I need to see Anna and the Apocalypse, clearly. First things first.
I'm just gonna send you the soundtrack so you can, have Sterling dance to it.
Uh-huh. Well, I guess that's kind of it for news, though, yeah?
Yeah. Let's hop into our review, which I suspect might be kind of brief, but maybe not. We talked more than I thought we would last week about those two episodes, but today we will be talking about episodes 3 and 4, Monsters and Some Guy. Monsters was directed by Greg Nicotero and written by Matthew Negrete and Channing Powell. Some Guy, as you mentioned, was written by David Leslie Johnson. What's his last name? There's like 5 names.
McGoldrick. He has 8
McGoldrick.
names.
And directed by Dan Liu. And, I have a couple of things about these episodes that are... I kind of feel like our review of this season is going to be the same theme, but let's hop in. So...
Yeah, it could be. So I think this episode starts with the most interesting part of it, which is this conversation between Morales. And I was wrong last week. His name isn't Oscar. He doesn't have a first name. Morales was never given a first name.
Okay.
The first of many injustices laid at the feet of this character. His wife and children all have first names.
But not him.
He does not. He is Mr. Morales. And is played by Juan Pareja, not by whoever I said he was played by last week. So I apologize for my being wrong. If that's something you can say. But I also think this was the most interesting part of the episode because it is finally this like parallel brought into close contact for Rick and it could have been, I guess there was only really one character who, there's a few other characters whose fate we don't know from earlier in the show. It could have been one of those guys from that episode Vatos, for instance. But they were pretty bad. But yeah, it was almost like he was written out of the TV show for this purpose, but I don't think that was the case. I don't think he comes back in the comic book.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I don't recall, though. it took me a bit, and I actually had to go back and remind myself who he was. Well, I knew vaguely who he was, but I just couldn't remember how many times he appeared.
He
But
didn't have a lot of screen. I mean, he was one of the first people you met from the Quarry group because it was him and T-Dog beating up a zombie
right,
when Rick got talked out of the tank.
right.
Like he was one of the first people you meet, but he doesn't have a lot of lines, as I recall.
No, and I mean he's got he's got his family, and then there's a whole bunch where they like basically separate from the group and go off to try to find their relatives. And we see him here, and his whole family is gone. And I guess, okay, so one of the things about the whole interaction between Rick and Morales that I think is kind of weird. So Morales has basically told Rick that he's called the Saviors back to get him, that there's like a price on his head, and he's making an awful lot of judgy judgment calls about Rick.
Calls him a monster at one point.
Yeah, and it's sort of like you don't really know. I mean, and there's this weird little thing where it's like he now knows, and Rick conveys to him that Glenn's been killed by Negan, that the widow is Maggie, and these are people that Morales didn't have like a ton of interaction with, right?
No, he didn't know Maggie at all.
He didn't know Maggie,
Glenn.
but like
Glenn
he knew
was
Glenn.
the only person, yeah.
He knew Glenn, but this is a lot in a very tiny amount of time to crush in some heavy stuff. But really the purpose of Morales here is to call Rick out on his behavior. Basically, Morales is like, now we've become monsters, and we just do the things we've got to do to survive, and it doesn't matter that I'm with the Saviors because it's all like basically an every man for himself.
Yeah.
And Rick's just had this whole incident where he killed the guy in the other room and sees that he had been protecting Gracie the baby. So
but this is not at all talked about. This is what the biggest gaping hole in this little conversation is. Why doesn't Mr. Morales, let's call him Bobby, why doesn't he say anything to Rick about like, hey, by the way, you just killed that guy and his daughter Gracie doesn't have a father anymore? Like, why isn't that even registering?
Talked about? I know. And then there's this whole weird thing where it's like, Rick tries to reason with him. He does his weird Rick thing, and Daryl just comes in, and Rick's like, "Wait, don't kill!" And Daryl just kills him. And there's,
Rick's equivocation where Rick is like, "Well, I wouldn't if the situation was reversed, I wouldn't be shooting you right now." And Morales is like, "Really?" He's like, "Well, I wouldn't want to."
Yeah, I know, but I mean, it's
pretty laughable.
It is funny. And that's kind of the theme throughout this whole episode. So it's not just between the Rick, this grappling with morality and what you do. And, we kind of continue the whole storyline with Jesus and his whole, where it's not only that they have a couple of people prisoner, they have like 25 saviors prisoner or more even. They're all like chained up, and it's kind of like, I like the whole, just the logistics of getting this group of prisoners back to Hilltop and trying to like their whole conversations along the way is just really ridiculous. You got Tara and Morgan both being like, no, these guys are not gonna, this is like a bad idea. And this is this is definitely one of my biggest pet peeves of this whole season. Like, we get it. This just seems ridiculous. We're showing like sort of like the same theme throughout this whole thing, and that's a little bit of what The Walking Dead does, but it just felt like they were very light on things that they could talk about during this season, and that all the stupid things that they did in terms of the plot points for this season were just like hitting you over the head with that. I wouldn't even just say a hammer. I would say with like, I don't know. It just it gets very tiresome after a while, and just completely ridiculous and implausible. And there's multiple examples of this. The one we just talked about with Rick and Morales, and then with Morgan and the group of savior prisoners, and
the savior prisoners. I feel like this would have worked. Granted, the back and forth between Morgan and Jesus going on, and Tara forever and ever. It's super tiresome, but. What's weird about this, what doesn't make a huge amount of sense, is by the time they're walking these guys back to Hilltop, it's like there's still more saviors than there are of them.
Right.
And why would the saviors have surrendered if they were still so numerically numerous? Like, it would have made more sense if there were only 10 of them left instead of like the 25 or 30 of them that
Right.
they have tied up. And just visually, it doesn't make
Well,
sense. When
and
you're looking
even
at this, you're like, well, that seems weird. And where did the rest of the attack group go? Like, there were more of them
right,
before. I
and
don't know where they all went.
but also the logistics of having this group, even though they're tied up like this, they're still. It's not like they're immobilized.
No,
they are able to do things together, and in fact, they do. But that is also really ridiculous and silly.
they're still pretty passive about the way that they
Yeah.
respond. And yeah, in that scene where the walkers start rolling down the
Oh
hill,
my gosh, what was that? It's like,
it's such a
it'd be great
shit
here.
show.
Some walkers rolling down the hill. Like it's just bizarre. Although I will say that some of those walkers looked pretty good, so I feel like Greg
Sure.
Nicotero was excited about the sort of half rotten,
Yeah, they look good, but just the way that the action unfolds, where everybody's all the good guys, let's call them, are shooting at the top of the hill, and suddenly there's already zombies at the bottom of the hill. I'm like, why would you still be shooting at the top of the hill when there are zombies among you?
right,
Like the fact that Morgan looks around and there's one already on him.
right,
He has such bad situational awareness all of a
right,
sudden. This thing had to roll down like 20 feet of hill to get to him. And he
right.
has no idea that it's right there.
Yeah,
It was, and then all the guys who are tied together are just like doing this weird shimmy thing where
yeah,
they're pulling against each other, but they're all pulling kind of to nowhere or towards the zombies instead of
right.
getting away. Like in a situation like this, wouldn't everybody kind of move away from the zombies? Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, you would think. And also, let's just also talk about when the one group that is successful in kind of coordinating and getting away. I just don't think there is any way that you're going to have like 6 or 7 guys all tied together managing to run through woods, like really
Yeah,
densely packed woods. There's just
yeah.
no way to do it. Like
Well,
you
it's follow the leader,
even so, it's
but
a little
Morgan would have caught them
ridiculous.
a lot
He
faster.
would have been a lot more like it just was so ridiculous and I don't know. Again, I disliked it the first time I watched it. This did not get any better. In fact, it was almost more frustrating to watch it just because I knew what was coming. But so we've got that group and then again the same conversation, the same argument. So Morgan catches up, kills one of the dudes that's like tied
He
together.
doesn't kill the annoying one either. He kills
No,
like
which
some
is like,
rando.
wouldn't it be that first guy? No, I guess it's just another red shirt that you're gonna kill. And then him and Jesus get into it, and Morgan eventually stops by saying he's not right again. Once more,
But
Morgan just kind of like is doing
the
his like,
getting into it though bears discussion
yeah,
because this basically puts Morgan in the camp of, oh, you're a huge liability and we need
yeah,
to kill you.
yeah,
And Jesus, so Jesus is just talking to him. I mean, yeah, it's a tired like lecture that we've been hearing over and over again. But then Morgan decides he's gonna kill Jesus
yeah.
and tries to stab him in the head several times and keeps getting his ass handed to him.
Right. And Jesus is just like, "Oh, you're not right." And eventually Morgan agrees but Jesus is pretty passive about all of this. He seems to take this in stride a little bit more calmly than I think probably would be the case here since
Yeah,
his ally just pretty much tried to take him out.
100% tried to kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make. I mean, and how Morgan would suddenly transfer his murderous rage from his enemy to his ally is not at all done
No.
correctly.
No.
So that was a really annoying scene. Frankly, it's just like, okay, we're not making any progress. This is not driving the story forwards. All this is doing is further underlining the fact that Morgan is going to run away and to fear the Walking Dead in season 9. Like
Yes.
that's the plot, I guess, that they wanted. But they could have done that without some weird infighting, like literal infighting.
Well, and then, we've also got, like, just to continue this theme, the whole Gregory Maggie standoff at Hilltop. And these are all decisions that are, like, really super strange. Like, why would you let. There's always this moral decision or this argument that they're having, oh, we're better than the saviors. And it's like, well, like, Gregory shows up driving Father Gabriel's car.
Yeah.
Okay. And they don't really question him that hard about it. He's slagging off people on the wall. Like he talks badly about Cal and Cal's on the wall and kind of like, hey man, really? And they still let him in.
Yep.
And
This
I'm just
this really is a kindler, gentler version of Maggie too. just I want you to crystallize this interaction that she's having here, and all the time she was smiling when she was giving the speech in the first two episodes, or the first episode, about like, yeah, we're gonna do this together and it's gonna be great, and yeah, leadership, rah rah, and
Mm-hmm.
oh, I believe in turning the other cheek and letting Father Gregory in and being nice and gentle, and then remember these scenes when you watch next season.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's crazy. And
So,
you know,
yeah.
and they contrast this by, you know, then, you know, she's made this decision, and of course they follow this up with Jesus showing up at the gate with all the saviors. And the just complete like ridiculousness of this, it just, I can't, this just infuriates me, because, and they do it deliberately. It's obvious that they do this, but Gregory is like, don't let them in, and then Maggie's of course is like, no, I guess we're gonna have to let them in. And Jesus is like, oh, we'll put them in the trailer and have guards on them 24/7. And it's like, you guys don't have that much manpower. You're gonna spend manpower watching these people that are a constant flight risk, and you know, you're gonna bring them within your compound. Like, all of this makes no sense to me. And I
It's
don't believe
100%
it. And I don't
disaster.
believe, and I also don't believe it of them either. I don't
No.
believe that Maggie would have made this decision. I think she would have known that this would have endangered her people. She's dealt with all of these. This is why Glenn died. I'm not saying that she would have necessarily destroyed all of them outright, but I don't think she would have brought them into the compound.
Yeah, and this also bears. We are introduced to like the one good savior in this sequence. Well, I guess we were introduced to him at the end of the last episode. He's one of the guys who's like, "I want to live." He's the guy who opens the vertical door. I
Yep,
forget his name.
me
Do you
too.
remember the character's name? Is it Jared or something? It's the
It's
guy with the
something.
Boston accent,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And he's like the only good savior. Maybe
Yep.
actually, maybe there's one or two others now in season 9 who we still get to know. But like that's basically all this is doing, is introducing one or two characters who we can point to and be like, see, not all the saviors were bad, but it turns out that like 99.9% of them were bad.
Right.
What else we got going on in here? So also at the end of the courtyard fight, which was still going on at the beginning of this episode, and we'd already bemoaned how long and annoying it was. So Eric had gotten shot at the end of
Yep.
in middle of last episode. Kind of he like gets up, shoots at some people, gets back down. Aaron comes over. He's like, "Hey, buddy, how you doing? Look at this is great." And Eric's like, "This is great. I feel great." And then they look down. He's just got blood gushing from his stomach somehow.
Yeah.
It seemed like a kind of unlikely way for him to get shot, considering his stomach was behind cover the whole
Yep.
time. But hey, let's just ignore that. But they needed him to have a wound that he would die from slower.
Slowly.
Very nice kind of departure scene, I think, between Aaron and Eric, even though Eric has always kind of been like holding Aaron back in terms of his badassery. But still, I guess it was kind of nice, and I liked the way that they did his send-off. Like Eric, the actor who played Eric, never even had to get into zombie makeup, as far as I can tell. Like by the time he's a zombie, he's so far away, and I thought it was interesting that they don't even bother like trying to go kill him or put him out.
Well, I thought he was going to pop up later somehow. I
he
thought
might
that,
still maybe,
and
but
maybe
yeah.
he will, and maybe I'm not remembering that he does. But yeah, I thought, and I also thought it was interesting that, you know, when Aaron's definitely overcome with grief, and he tries to start to go after him, and the comment
Kinda.
is kind of, but the comment is that's not really him.
Yeah,
And
and it's another one of these Alexandria characters, like a Tobin, but whose name I don't remember.
I don't either, and I feel
It's the
bad
guy who
about it.
got like shot in the ankle or something.
Yeah, yeah.
During the Great Quarry herd
Whatever it
scene
was, yeah.
of season 6. Yeah, so that dude, no idea what his name is. He's like, it's not him, man. Let's go back.
Yeah.
Maybe one day we'll learn that character's name.
Yep.
This is the advantage to watching with subtitles, which is what I have to do typically because kids.
Yeah.
I'm watching it like at night or whatever. I learned the name of Man Bun from The Kingdom. His name is Eduardo
Yeah.
because it's in it's shown in the subtitles. However, the guy who tells Aaron that it's not Eric anymore, his name was not shown, so I still have no idea who he is. The only thing that we have a little scene of King Ezekiel and his crew winning some fights at the end of this episode, and then that's kind of, oh no, wait, they win 3 fights in a row, 2 fights, yeah, 3 fights in a row. It's like, we're not going to lose anybody. This is great. I smile, yet I smile. We introduce that language, and then at the end of this episode is when, gosh darn, M2 takes out 40 people in one burst.
Right. And it's kind of interesting that they even let them get that far. Like, it seems like, why would you sort of let them take out all your people outside and then decide to take them out? Maybe it's that they were setting up the gun. I don't know. But that seemed a little bit crazy to me, though it sets up the whole thing, because you set up the sort of King Ezekiel kind of losing himself, because he's been this optimist this entire time. He's talking about the odds against them. He's doing a good job at getting the confidence of his troops, including Carol, because she's also smiling. And one of the things that they say is, like, they may have more numbers, but we have strategy. And we see them be successful with this at least twice, up until the point where like 40 of them get taken out. And that, that sets up the whole scene in a pretty dark way. I just was sort of surprised that the saviors would have allowed such a large number of their people to be lost, especially when they're defending the compound where all the weapons actually were, which was Gavin's compound. But it does lead to this scene with King Ezekiel where he's basically in a whole field full of his dead people, and he gets, I don't know, what did you, because
that's the next episode.
Oh, sorry,
at
but
the end of
this
one.
But this is like but this starts it out on an optimistic note. And so you kind of see his philosophy succeeding here, which is a much more positive and optimistic view of this world.
Smiling in the face of adversity. There are some serious technical problems with the way that they decide to take out all these people, of course, that, while the machine gun is on a mount, there's only a certain amount of depression that you can get out of a mount, and it's on like the second floor. And while they are super clustered up in this field, they're not nearly clustered up enough for everybody to be killed outright. They're trying to make it seem like this 50 caliber machine gun is gonna tear people to pieces, and they do a good job of showing that in the next episode. And they do a great job of showing how, instead of thinking about their own safety, his people are all jumping on top of him at the end of this episode. And I thought that was
cool.
It shows the strength of what he has built. And while they tear that all down in the next episode,
I know, it's
kind of insane, the loyalty that the kingdom people have for him, and kind of inspiring. I still think, though, this machine gun would have opened fire. Maybe 5 people would have been shot, and the rest of them would have scattered. And there's no way in hell that one machine gun could have taken out this entire group of people.
Well, that was my sense too, just because of how far apart they were, and some of them did scatter. Yeah. So it was a little bit, that was just kind of lame.
Super lame. But this is where we're left, and the next episode, Some Guy, begins here. Mm-hmm. We have King Ezekiel waking up under a pile of bodies and finding we have King Ezekiel waking up under a pile of bodies, but we also have a bunch of flashbacks to earlier in the day. Mm-hmm. Him, like, getting ready, putting on his king outfit in a way. Like, he starts off just looking like a dude, mm-hmm. and ends up with red feathers in his hair and a swagger and the kingly thing going on and making speeches. I actually kind of enjoyed a lot of this stuff in this episode. There were definitely parts of it I thought were a total waste of time, but not this stuff. I thought that the King Ezekiel girding himself to be a king was pretty cool. Right.
I liked some of that story. I liked that we get some of his backstory. I thought that the tearing... Okay, so we basically build him up. We see how he became this, and there's this whole conversation between him and Carol in some of these flashbacks where he talks about how he was a zookeeper, which explains Shiva. and basically had a decision whether to rescue Shiva or let her die, and decided that he wanted to be the guy who jumped into the cage. And this is very, very much in line with what we've seen with him. I guess my issue with how this episode goes and how they sort of bring King Ezekiel to his knees, so to speak, at least in his own head, is that I just don't think that this confidence in himself would have been shaken to the core as it was, even given all the things that have happened. He is not going to be somebody who is listening to this horror, whoever this guy is, that one of the saviors that basically is that, I mean, I guess he's the equivalent of the devil on your shoulder, I suppose. Just saying all the things that you are, your worst fears about yourself and things
Gunther.
like that. Yeah. I don't know that Ezekiel would have bought it, given how he has, and maybe it is the loss of his people.
I think,
but he
went, you know.
Yeah, I agree, but you can hear Carol inside. He knows that there's some survivors still. And then when, he basically, Jerry comes out to rescue him. I just feel like it still would have been there. And, but they strip away everything here. So they basically strip away his people. He's injured. Shiva gets taken out in this episode, which is a real bummer, but maybe they just couldn't deal with having the tiger in there anymore. But I think they had to strip away those things from him. And that's they basically build him up and then tear him down within these 2 episodes. So,
that savior Gunther is actually a pretty interesting character. Like you said, yeah, he does seem to just know all the ways to twist the knife. In Ezekiel, he also looks like just a young Jeffrey Dahmer or something.
Totally.
I don't know. He's like a total serial killer.
Look.
And he's got some interesting mannerisms, like holding the gun up to his mouth and saying, "I'm Negan." It's pretty funny little character. He only has like 5 minutes, but he talks a lot during that 5 minutes, and he really does get under Ezekiel's skin before he gets cut in half by Jerry. We also had Alvaro show up and try to save. Like, that was a nice way to be like, oh, there's a little bit of hope. Oh, no, the hope's gone.
Yep.
Like Alvaro getting shot. Do you remember the good old days when Andrea's sister, took all night to turn into a zombie?
Yeah. Apparently happens really fast.
Yeah, I mean, how long... We don't have a stopwatch or anything, but how long do you think he was under that pile of bodies? A minute?
Long enough for them all to be reanimating, because I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, man, this seems a little strange.
I don't think it was long enough for them to be reanimating. I think that the show is just changing the rules as we go.
Probably.
Yeah. It was people are getting up, and it's not like they all get up at the same time, but one gets up, then 4, then 20, and then suddenly there's a small herd chasing them for the rest of the episode. And some of it is the saviors that they had killed 5 minutes before the machine gun opened up, but still, it's kind of insane that everybody just kind of stands up.
And then the same thing happened in the whole firefight, the longest, most annoying gun battle, whatever.
Exactly.
Suddenly those things are reanimating within seconds. It's not.
So there's consistency between these 2 scenes of this season,
but not in the show.
In the grand scheme of things, this is not consistent. This is convenience for the writing, and it's kind of a bummer. Carol has made her way, right before the machine gun opened up, she's like, somebody has to clear that compound. I'm going to go do it. And she goes off by herself. Realistically, they would have, first of all, been spreading out and watching over the perimeter and having cover still. Just because they'd killed these guys doesn't mean it's the end. And she would not have gone by herself.
No.
But she does in this case so that Ezekiel can lose everybody that
right,
he's
that's
responsible
important.
for.
Well, and then it's also kind of crazy because she manages to take out this big group of saviors from her little hole that she's hiding in up in the ceiling.
How did she get there so fast?
I don't know. She's like ceiling cat. I don't know.
She's like a ninja. She gets up into the ceiling tiles.
Yeah, but yet
and shoots them blind.
And this is clearly an advantage she has, but yet suddenly she scurries away when basically the same number of people are coming through. I'm kind of like, why are you waiting to give these guys an advantage? You had the advantage. You know that they're coming through, but since you had this advantage up in the ceiling, wouldn't you do that again? I don't know. It just seemed crazy to me that this all even happened the way it did, but...
Yeah. Well, this is when the episode starts to really drag too. Is in part it's from here on. There's like Jerry and the king fighting for their lives because they're in front of a barbed wire fence or a chain link fence that they cannot somehow get over or through.
Despite having
then,
an axe.
Well, yeah, and the axe
help.
breaks, which is a bummer. And Carol inside this base goes on for days. It felt so long, this episode.
It did.
Because, like, yeah. So this fight goes... It feels just as tiresome as the courtyard fight by the end of this episode. But she does manage to outwit or... Yeah. Joey pooched it, and she gets to push this button eventually that opens a gate because buttons still work 2 years after the apocalypse.
Mm-hmm. At least
Wasn't
in
that
this
kind
case.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the Iago and Baldy drive off in the Humvee with whatever's left of the guns, and she decides to save the king and Jerry. And I don't know, man. Like, yeah, I've got nothing here. It's just like, okay, yeah, she chooses her friends over the mission. Okay, nobody's really that bummed about it. And then, yeah, like you said, they go into the woods and Shiva gets killed, which I don't feel bad about that either. Like we were saying, that alligator in Fear the Walking Dead is way more adapted to the zombie apocalypse than any tiger ever would be.
True.
They do some cool effects with Shiva picking them up with her mouth and throwing people.
But the other issue I have with this is that these are all like weird toxic Avenger zombies.
Yeah.
They're all half falling apart. Even when Ezekiel's like taking care of them, they're breaking down so quickly, like into powder. I don't believe that they would overwhelm Shiva.
A 500-pound tiger, yeah.
Not at all. And that
agree.
I was like, come on, man, if you're going to do this, don't do it this way. So that kind of bummed me out. And it also bummed me out because it's like, you know, she is basically the symbol of Ezekiel's thing, his whole kingdom. And it just, you know, I like him. I do like him as a character. And I don't, you know, the fact that this optimistic character that has managed to build this whole kingdom based upon a somewhat of a delusion, a good delusion, but somewhat of a delusion, even if he is aware of it, like, I just think that was kind of a fun little thing that they did. And, you know, this bummed me out that they did this. I was like, oh man, you have to kill off the tiger too. I mean,
you're gonna be bummed whenever they kill an animal companion, you know.
Yeah,
like, so it's just the
horse.
like when the horses have died, it's always just
God,
like,
that was such a bummer.
Yeah, and that's just gonna keep happening on this show. And now there's a dog in season 9, so we'll wait and see how that goes.
We know it won't go well.
And then we also have this long, like, it's not super long, but this car chase between Iago and Baldy versus Daryl and Rick. And this, it's annoying. It's okay until Rick pulls up in his Jeep next to the Humvee. And there's
jumps in.
A couple heartbeats of them just driving perfectly straight and at the same speed as each other next to one another before Rick jumps in. And neither of them are shooting at each other.
Nope.
I'm just like, all right, this feels extremely A-team. I don't know. It was just a super dumb, annoying scene that didn't need to happen. It felt like a padding action scene. But that's so much of what we've been looking at in these first 4 episodes is action as padding. Mm-hmm. This show doesn't know how to do padding, I guess. Or it really just needs to have shorter seasons.
Maybe.
Like, the more I watch this season, the more I'm thinking season 7 is when they could have wrapped up the entire Savior storyline.
Oh,
like
yeah.
The mid-season finale could have been the confrontation in front of Alexandria where Shiva shows up, and the season finale could have been the final fight with the Saviors. There's no need for any of this other garbage. If anything, they just had to do a lot of this because they have all these characters who weren't in the books, and they don't know how to deal with them. They don't know how to give them screen time and like stories.
Right. And they do, I mean, they are setting this up, these very long battle scenes and whatever. And I guess, I mean, my guess is what they were trying to do. Yes, it is padding, but they're trying to build up this big thing where it's like the big betrayal and you discover all this stuff later. And there's a hint of it because Gregory basically tells Maggie that Negan knew everything before he got there, which is obvious why. But I agree with you. I think they just have no idea how to weave these storylines together in a way that makes sense and in a way that gives these characters some kind of like foothold in the universe, because it's a massive cast to be dealing with. And you know what? I think for some other shows that have really big casts, like Game of Thrones has sometimes similar issues. And what they ended up having to do was combine different characters in the books or create something to sort of pull that storyline along. I think they most of the time did it a little bit more successfully than The Walking Dead. But Walking Dead, I mean, this is season 8 of Walking Dead, you know? So, and I would say Game of Thrones has a little bit more of a roadmap to some extent and a little bit more freedom because they basically are now making things up to wrap up the storyline, and they had an end in sight, and The Walking Dead doesn't. So this is, I don't know what happened in this season specifically, but it just feels like they did get a little bit lost in the large cast and the multiple storylines that they couldn't really keep everything like kind of tight in the way that we would probably like to see it.
Yeah, and I think it just comes down to Gimple or Kirkman or whoever making that decision at the end of season 6, being like, all right, next season we're going to do a double season story arc on the Saviors. And somebody should have been like, hell no, we don't have enough content to support that. But they did it anyway, and that's what we're stuck with. And, you know, I'm seeing a lot of like The Walking Dead season 9 is too little too late. Like, I guess their season 10 has already been renewed. But who knows how long the franchise can survive now? Like, you can't go 2 seasons hemorrhaging audience and expect to be like invincible.
Right. Yeah. So I guess that's, I mean, for me, that's what I have to say about these 2 episodes,
Yes.
but we'll continue to slog along. So join us, let us know what you think about these 2 and join us next week as we talk about episodes 5 and 6. And if you'd like to leave us a note, you can visit our website, reanimatedpodcast.com. Tweet at us, reanimatedpcast is the handle, or send us an email, reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. And anything else to add, Mr. Tiffin?
I love Reanimated Podcast.
Woo. So until next time, ciao.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening.